we have a most distinguished panel, and of course any one of them could talk or answer questions on their own. So I've got to be very bossy with them, which is why I've moved to the middle, because I've got a better control of, at least I hope I have. Now, our idea is that we will ask each of them just, and literally I want to keep them to the time, just to tell us something about the things that they really think they could most want to communicate with this audience. Just very shortly. Of course, it'll be about what they do, but also what they want you to do and what they want to connect with you for. I think that would be my basic thing. So, because I'm an old-fashioned person, I'm going to start with a lady. So, I wonder whether I can turn to Fiona to begin.
So, what an honour. Thank you very much. What a pleasure.
Is the CEO of Octopus Electric Vehicles. I always try to be honest about my views about firms. I am a passionate fan of Octopus, which has done all sorts of things which I think are wonderful, and have done something which nobody did before, which is that they are remarkable with their customers. The difference between Octopus and the old N-Power is the difference between chalk and cheese. And so I would like to welcome you as a really good example of British industry.
Oh, what an amazing introduction. Thank you so much. I'd like to take credit for that. I mean, it's clearly a much wider team activity and kind of culture running through the business that was started by Greg, our group CEO. So I'm Fiona, I run the EV business at Octopus, and we do kind of two things primarily in EVs. One is we try to make it really easy and affordable for people to make that switch to electric transport, and I'll come back to that in a bit more detail. But also, it's this amazing moment where the auto industry, transport meets energy. And the energy sector is rapidly decarbonising and needs to store that energy for when we need it most. And we're currently putting batteries on everybody's driveways and into depots and parking out on the street. So how do we use that energy storage capacity to help decarbonise the grid and have really smart, affordable energy for everyone, as well as smart and affordable transport? So on the kind of leasing side, we set up a leasing company during lockdown. We launched that 3.5 years ago, and we particularly specialise in salary sacrifice, which means that we help employers, like the likes of PepsiCo, Dyson, Next, but also a load of small and medium-sized companies offer EV benefits, like a benefit scheme, so cycle to work, but for your car. So you can save 30 to 40% every month on your electric car. And as you know, electric cars have been more expensive. And although the costs are plummeting, absolutely coming down rapidly in terms of battery costs and the cost of those vehicles being manufactured, that has really helped to stimulate the market and has encouraged people to take that next step. So we find that employers really embrace the EV opportunity, and they're encouraged to incentivize and kind of promote green, clean transport to their staff. And we've seen now 20,000 drivers take that up in the last 3.5 years, and that's growing really quickly. So we're super excited about that. So salary sacrifice has been an amazing opportunity. What's also happened, though, is, of course, since I started getting into this space again, in 2017, there was 5 cars that could do over 100 miles in a single charge. There's now like 100 different models from well over 30 different manufacturers, and it's just going like the clappers. It's amazing. But consumer awareness and knowledge is not keeping up. And it's not just the cars and the range of the cars and how amazing they are and the kind of just the range in terms of how far they go, but the range in terms of the different types of cars that are on offer for different types of people and different affordability levels. The awareness isn't there of that, but also of the charging and things like that people can charge up at home and they can save over £1,000 a year versus their fuel costs, or they might be able to charge up at work or on the curbside, or even public charging is rolling out at pace too. So the awareness is not keeping up there. Also things like battery life as well. There's a lot of kind of myths in that space, and it's not being helped by actually some people sharing misinformation in that space too. So actually, I guess one of my first asks in this audience, which is like a really expert audience in this space, is how do we come together to really keep those messages, the correct, fair, accurate information flowing out there at pace so that consumers and beyond consumers, actually, businesses, et cetera, can keep up with some of this information. So Dan Caesar, somewhere in the audience, recently launched Electric Vehicles UK as well, who's on a mission to kind of help pull some of that together. So do catch up with him later too. The second bit is in the used market. So, my goodness, I shared some information yesterday. It just blew my mind that some of the Audis that are hitting the used market at the minute are a third cheaper than their petrol or diesel equivalent. And in addition to that, like this is equivalent to like £15,000 cheaper in the second-hand market compared to their petrol or diesel equivalent. It's a huge saving. They've got good range on them. This is not like early EVs that didn't have good range. They have good range on them. The charging has come on hugely. You know, you can save money on the running costs too, but yet somehow they're being really underrated. So this is actually a massive opportunity. And I see opportunities everywhere in this market, and I wish I had a team twice the size to go at it even quicker, because I think entrepreneurial dealers, but also people in this room might want to get more involved in that space, because I think there's a huge opportunity there. And we're finding auction houses also massively undercutting, and we're finding some entrepreneurs now picking up from auction houses and selling them at 20% cheaper, 20% more expensive premium through other channels and making margin. So big opportunity in the used market there. That's also, though, undermining some of the leasing market. So there's, you know, whether or not we want to think about price guarantees. OEM confidence, ZEV mandates, super important to continue to keep that going and continuing to extend that low benefit in kind rates. And then charging, obviously, we need to continue rolling out charging at pace. And then finally, through to the future, looking at that vehicle to grid space, I think we've got more cars coming. I think there's a lot of exciting things and innovation in the future. So I think looking at how we're going to use those batteries, I think we've got an exciting couple of years connecting up lots of cars to the grid.
Well, thank you very much. I don't think we ought to kid ourselves about the misinformation. There's a great deal of that is being put around purposely by the nastier members of the oil and gas industry, who have no intention except to try to extend their continuance. And I just think we have to realise that this is a cutthroat world as far as they're concerned. And after all, there are companies in the oil and gas industry. I'm not making a specific comment here because I don't want to be in court, but I shall just say to you, after all, ExxonMobil itself put off the battle against climate change by spending vast sums of money pretending it wasn't happening when they knew perfectly well it was happening. So don't let us kid ourselves. There are people in this world who are busy trying to misinform, which is why I think we have to go to much greater extent to put right, Fiona, what you have said is wrong.
And I would say we live in a capitalist market, and these companies are incentivized to provide shareholder return.
Yes.
So it's different incentives that are there to kind of share some of the information that might support their cause. So they're well mobilized in that space. Yes. And we just also need to make sure that we're sharing lots of amazing driver stories. 96% of drivers in our research don't want to go back to a petrol or diesel car. Half of the drivers that are looking want an electric vehicle at the minute, and yet people are saying that, you know, there's not enough demand for 20% of the market to buy EV, but we know that's not the case. So we're seeing that in the research, but some of that information is not flowing through. So we just need to make sure that we get those good user stories out there, those drivers that don't want to go back. How are they charging? What are they experiencing with battery life? We've got the data, we've got the stats. We just need to get it out there.
Well, I've had an electric car for 2.5 years, would never go back to anything else, and I have to say that I have never had any difficulty in charging it, and I travel all over the country in it. All one has to do is just to think to oneself, if I'm travelling 350 miles, it would be quite good to stop off for a pee on the way. That's the only thing one has to do. I do not understand why people have problems with this altogether. Now, following my view, I'm going to turn next to Cordi from the National Grid electricity distribution. And I'm looking forward to hearing how she is looking to her customers, because I have a theory about the energy industry, which is that it doesn't always think of customers.
What a fantastic introduction. I think I wish I worked for Octopus, but there we go, right? So I think, thank you, Lord Deben. Maybe just to explain a little bit about a national grid electricity distribution. So we're the largest electricity distribution network by geography in the UK, and we serve 8 million customers across the region, keeping their lights on. And of course, our role's been dramatically changing over the past few years as customers' interaction with electricity and usage is changing dramatically. So we're on this journey as well. And we're seeing a phenomenal shift in the customers' uses and connections to our grid. And in fact, in the last 5 years alone, we've seen a 900% increase in connections to the grid as consumers, small and large businesses, really start to take a more active role and a personal role in delivering net zero. And that's triggered a huge debate about how do we enable new and thousands of distributed connections to the grid that serve multiple purposes. So we still keep the lights on, but we now become a main source of fueling for people's cars and heating homes. And in the last price control, we're regulated by Ofgem, there was a huge step change in anticipation of the growth in electricity distribution networks to meet these new customer needs and desires. And so at National Grid, over the next 5 years, we'll be investing £30 billion in the UK's networks. That's both the transmission business and the distribution. And in my region alone, £7.5 billion, of which £2 billion will be new connections. And we're really starting to see an acceleration. I think you asked in your opening remarks to remain upbeat about the progress as well as some of the challenges. And for motorway service areas and then domestic EV chargers, we've seen real progress. Through the Green Recovery Scheme last year, we delivered 6 rapid chargers in the motorway service areas. We've got another 10 being delivered over the next 8 to 12 months. And then we've seen around 50 to 60,000 per year EV charging delivered to people's homes and connected to our grid. What's the big challenge in front of us? Well, I don't want to bore everybody with connections reform, but I think we could spend a whole day talking about it. There is some real change needed in the way that we govern and allow connections to happen that meets both the pace and the volume expectations as we move forward. And we're seeing quite tremendous progress and reform, but we haven't stopped yet. And I expect to see even more reform needed with the government's Clean Power 2030 plan. We've also got to recognise that this is big infrastructure that needs to be delivered. So alongside making sure we've got the right reforms for connection to deal with the pace and the volume, we need to make sure that the enabling institutions allow that to happen in the right timeline. So you're going to hear us talking a lot about planning reform. I think there's been a great debate nationally about that, how that happens, but we also see that at a distribution level. And so getting access to the land, getting the right approvals and consents in the right manner that will involve community engagement but speeds up the process is going to be essential. And then I think the final thing for us, it may seem a bit boring to talk about system governance, but how we bring regional energy system plans to life. We've got a new national energy system operator that's now left National Grid and is a new public institution. And it has some really critical roles to play in making sure that when we bring together the local authorities, the local net zero roadmaps, and what the implications are for infrastructure, that they come together in an affordable and pacey way. So there's quite a few things to get through there, and I think some quite specific barriers that we all could address together.
Well, that's very helpful. And to make up for my first comments, let me say, it seems to me that this is an area where you, as an organisation, are really determined to get this right. And in a sense, what we have to do is to learn the lesson of the railways. If you remember, the history of the railways was that people built railways. If you take the east of England, there were 5 railway companies who hated each other. So they did everything to compete with each other instead of providing for the customer, if you see what I mean. So we had too many lines going to some places and no lines at all going to other places. And they took years and years to come together to be able to try to service the place as a whole. And it seems to me that what you are seeking to do is to make sure that we get the benefits of different operators, so that you don't have the cloying effect of just one, but at the same time, each one of those is working with the other organisations, and it's hugely important for the local authorities to understand what is going on in areas. We've suffered from that in the past, the planners and the providers just not being together. So.
Yeah, I think just two points to make to that. I think the collaboration is absolutely essential. Yes. If you look at the National Connections Action Plan, it is all transmission owners and distribution owners coming together under a common agreement, which I think is really critical. There's still a degree of standardisation in the way that we work with different customer types and the experience that they feel. And I think, certainly we're wanting to lean into that. And through this latest price control, local authority energy action plans are very prominent in the way that we need to work together, because decarbonisation's becoming local now.
Yeah. Good. Well, thank you very much. Now, this seems to me to be the ideal moment to look at one of the organisations which has been involved in the development of road transport for a very long time. So I'm going to turn to Professor Neville Jackson, who's the chairman of the RAC Foundation.
Thank you. Good morning. If you'll forgive me, I'm not really going to talk on behalf of the RAC Foundation today, because I'm going to talk about the industrial opportunity that UK faces. I have a number of roles, one of which is non-exec director of the UK Advanced Propulsion Centre, and I also chair the UK Auto Council Strategy Group. So I'm going to really talk about the industrial opportunity and hopefully provide a bit more of a positive view than maybe we've had so far. So, first of all, maybe I should comment on what the industry, UK automotive industry, does for the UK. About 80% of what we make in the UK is exported. It is massively important for the UK economy. And there I'm combining both the on-road and off-road sectors. The off-road sector in the UK is the largest manufacturing sector in Europe for that type of vehicle, suffering the same kind of issues and challenges. We employ close to 1 million jobs overall, including direct and indirect. Those are highly paid, they're skilled. We invest over £3.5 billion in R&D every year, the biggest sector for R&D in the UK. However, historically, we make far more engines, combustion engines, than we do vehicles. So when it comes to the new transition, that presents us with a little bit of a problem. It's only going to be possible, in my view, and with many of my colleagues' view, if industry and government work very closely together to overcome some of the challenges. One of the things we have done over the past 10 years is form what's called the UK Automotive Council, which is all about getting the industry and government working together, discussing issues and finding plans to resolve those. The only reason that council came together is because we had really good leadership. People who were able to bring disparate people with different views together and to work as one group. Now, I've been fortunate in my 40-year career in industrial R&D at Ricardo to work around the world with many governments, just about all of the world's automotive companies. We don't think we're very good at collaborating and talking with government in the UK, but I can tell you we are much better than many of our competitors. They complain about it all the time. And they say to me, how do you get so much collaboration in the UK? We really need to exploit that strength because it really can work for us in the transition. So the role of the Automotive Council has really been to try and define what we need to achieve in detail for our industry to be successful. What does good look like? And we've produced a consensus report on what we're trying to achieve. We did that last year. Our new work is defining what do we need to do in the next 10 years to achieve what good looks like in 2035. So that future strategy is laser focused on making the UK the most attractive place to make zero-emission vehicles. That we have the best infrastructure, we have the best planning system that can get things done quickly. Hopefully this government can make a few changes. A competitive regulatory system that's consistent with our export markets, and the best overall business environment for that investment. I mean, the three key enablers that we see for that future strategy, just three key things: innovation, investment, and skills. It's not rocket science. It's probably the same for many sectors, but those are the things we're really focused on. The other areas, perhaps, that are major initiatives and interventions, first of all, really focused on late-stage R&D. How do we get those really good new net zero products into the market? So late-stage R&D is really important, and it's an area, again, UK is focused on, not many of our international competitors are. We need to focus on all of those zero-emission vehicle technologies that might make a difference, not try and pick the winners now. We need to do everything if we want to meet our targets, everything that could provide the route to where we need to get to and to meet our carbon targets we should be working on. So we have our Faraday initiative, the only organisation in the world that I've seen that links basic research, industrial and industrial scale-up on battery technologies, all under one roof. It is really efficient in the way we do it, and really great things are coming out from that as to how to bring down the price, cost, and improve the durability of battery systems. We're also focused on digitalisation in a big way. Digital is really important for all sectors, for the energy system, for automotive. We have a lead in the UK in financial technology. If we can apply that kind of technique to other sectors, we will make major steps forward, and we want to halve the cost of product development and halve the time it takes us to bring those new products to market. So our overall targets, we make about 1 million vehicles a year in the UK. Our target is to increase that by 50% by 2035. Double productivity, as I spoke before, and halve the cost. Reducing the cost, particularly of electric vehicles, is the major challenge. At the moment, those vehicles are only affordable for the mass market with significant subsidies, either for grants for buying the vehicles or state intervention to reduce the cost of manufacture, as is happening in China. We need to move away from that and make these vehicles affordable to the mass market. We need about 100 kilowatt hours of battery manufacturing capacity in the UK. We have a plan to do that, and we're making good progress. We have 2 large gigafactories being built at the moment, and there are more in the pipeline. And our aim is to spend over 40 billion on R&D over the next 10 years. We'll need some support from government to make that happen, but that's a big enabler to enable us to lead the world in this zero emissions vehicle manufacture. So my key message, just want to leave you with, I think we've got a choice. We can embrace the challenge we face and really succeed and grow, or we can just delay it and die. The whole UK automotive manufacturing sector would disappear, lose critical mass, won't be there anymore, will ruin our balance of payments for the UK and be very unsuccessful. But to drive that, we need collaboration, really root and branch collaboration. And to make that collaboration work, you need good, strong leadership. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Prof. 3 words you used: innovation, investment, and skills. And if I may just say so, the skills one is the one which is most overlooked and in many ways the most difficult thing. If I ask the panel, I bet you that there would be nobody who would not say that the issue of skills and the shortage of skills is absolutely central. And I'm sorry, so far this government has actually gone backwards on that, and we've got to get it to go forwards. It's the one thing it's gone backwards on, and it's a great pity because skills are really crucial if we're going to meet our requirements. Now then, having asked the chairman of the RAC Foundation, although he hasn't spoken on behalf of it, it seems to me reasonable to move to the president of the AA, which is what I will do.
Thank you, Lord Deben. And
Edmund King.
thank you. Yeah, I'm delighted we did agree beforehand to talk on behalf of consumers, because I think the title is very important, Seizing the Industrial Opportunity When, Where and How. I think that's really important. It's important for industry, but also for politics. I think one of the best definitions of politics is who gets what, when, where, and how. So these two overlap. And I just wanted to quote you a very short thing. Electric cars have long been considered as a possible solution to the problem of traffic congestion, noise, and exhaust pollution in major urban centres. Although the use of electric power can provide quiet, economical, and exhaust-free transport, these advantages have been offset by the limited range between recharging stops and the lack of suitable charging facilities. No, not the Daily Mail or the Daily Telegraph of 2024, but Motor Magazine from 1974, 50 years ago. So what I wanted to show is that we have actually made progress. I mean, this article in Motor Magazine talked about a car in Amsterdam at the time, a WIT car or white car, powered by a 2000 watt, 24 volt Bosch electric motor with a range of 3 miles. So things have come on. Today, there is a great industrial opportunity out there. But for any of your industry to work, you need consumers, you need the customers with you. It's no good building EVs, extending grid connections, increasing charge points if the customers don't come. But I think the positive news, the good news, is that the customers will come. The cars are certainly getting better. The range is getting longer. Charging provision is spreading. But yes, some customers need help along the way. Fiona alluded to it, but the range, the Mercedes EQS, 452 miles, the Volkswagen ID7, 437 miles. No one needs more than that. And even the costs on used EVs now, for the younger generation, I checked on AA cars before, you can get a 2007 Nissan Leaf for £2,700. You can get a Renault Kangaroo for £2,900. Or, Chairman, you can get a Rolls-Royce Spectra for £369,000, all electric. So the market is changing. The ZEV mandate, and we still need clarity on 2030, 2035 and all that, which we didn't hear from the Minister this morning. But the ZEV mandate, without a doubt, is pushing that supply side, and that supply side is being pushed. But what we need more work on is on the demand side for the consumers. And we need to look at the whole EV life cycle, from learning to drive, youngsters getting their first car. Can they afford an EV? Can they afford to charge it? So buying the car, insuring the car, servicing the car, etc. And I think this is where we need more guidance, more skills we need within the companies. And we will need some incentives. And of course, we need proper information. And, just one example as a EV driver, we hear the batteries don't last, your tyres wear out really quickly, your brakes don't work. My current EV is 4 years old. It was in the garage yesterday, and they sent me one of those videos, and I was kind of dreading it. They go underneath the car, and the technician goes round. So I've done about 36,000 miles, and my tyres are still, every single one of them, original tyres, more than 50% tread, way beyond the legal thing. My rear brakes, they actually said, haven't worn at all. So they're kind of regenerative braking, so it's not putting pressure on the brakes. So things about the servicing of EVs, tyres and batteries, the range I get from the car is still the same. So we need to convince people that these cars aren't just for the early adopters, but consumers need help. They are still hesitant. They're not hostile. They are still hesitant, but they need help along the way. And that's certainly something ourselves working with others are willing to do.
Well, thank you very much. I have to say, you used the word insurance. I do think the whole insurance industry has found it quite difficult to handle both electric vehicles and indeed photovoltaic cells on the roofs of buildings. One of the reasons why we're not getting what we ought to get is the way the insurance industry has failed to create circumstances in which these things can be properly insured. And I think that's an area which we must press very hard. Quite agree with you about the electric motor car. Mine has had one service. The only problem is our little local garage, which we have supported all our lives and are very keen on. Of course, it's very, very hard on them because they don't see us either for petrol or indeed for repair. So I feel a little bit unhappy about that if you live in the country and this matters so much to us. My first car was called a Nice. No internal combustion engine was the first electric car I had. It did have a 40-mile limit, and my wife liked driving it around because in those days you could park it anywhere in London and it could stay there for as long as you liked, which for someone who was shopping was particularly convenient. The only trouble was its batteries ran out. I mean, the use of the battery meant one constantly had to replace it, but made it one of the most expensive cars I've ever had.
Yeah, I had a similar Ford Think car
Yes.
22 years ago with a 38-mile range,
Yes.
but it was similar. You could park anywhere free, and that was the
Extremely
advantage.
helpful.
But things have come on.
They have. Well, now, the last person I'm going to turn to is the Director of Connections, the UK Power Networks. And as I was polite to Octopus, I think I must be also polite to UK Power Networks, who I've always found have learnt that if you ring them up, they answer the telephone. This is not always found in the utilities industry, Utility Week, if I may say so. Indeed, I once had to say that N-Power, now gone, so I can say this, N-Power was the company my wife hated most, because she had wasted more of her time waiting for them on the telephone than any other company. So therefore it was top of the list of the ones that she disliked. But UK Power Networks are extremely good. When you ring them up, there's somebody at the end of the phone.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. The phrase "damned with faint praise" comes to mind. And I was going to talk about that in kind of by way of initial remarks. So UK Power Networks, pleased to be a sponsor of today's event. And like Cordi, we distribute power to 8 million customers in the south east of England. And what I would say to the point of service, I think it's one of the most notable changes I have seen in our industry over the last 10 years. In that I think historically there was always a strong service ethic for the customer, this general mass, this blob called the customer. What has changed over the last 10 years is we recognise customers as individuals, and we recognise that if we're to provide the service that we should all deserve and expect from the organisations we deal with in the public realm, we have to put the customer at the core of the processes that we operate. And that's certainly a big change that I've seen within UK Power Networks, and I think it's a big change that we've seen right across the industry. And I'm pleased to hear that you've noticed that, because we do invest an awful lot of time, care and effort in making sure we do serve our customers. In terms of the subject matter, picking up the theme of positivity, I think we have a lot to be positive about. There are now some 600,000 vehicles on UK Power Networks roads in the southeast of England, nearly 70,000 public charge points. And what's remarkable about that statistic is it's up some 40% over the last year. And even 3 or 4 years ago, I think we would have all been sceptical that we could have achieved that rate of change. Buses, we're here in London, the largest bus fleet in the country. Some 20% of the TfL bus fleet is now fully electric. And I can tell you we're out there today working on the byways and highways of London to increase that number as soon as we can. So the rate of change is increasing, and I think there are reasons to be optimistic. Despite that rate of change and despite that growth in the electrification of transport. You may be surprised to know that we've actually seen the total demand of power running through our network fall over the last 5 years. It's been on a downwards trajectory. Historically, we see a maximum demand of some 16 gigawatts across our 3 networks. That's years ago, right? Last year, it was something like 13.5 gigawatts. So there is capacity in that network. But I'm not naive, and the direction of travel is clear. And when you take the decarbonisation of transport in tandem with the decarbonisation of heat, that trajectory out to 2050 is only going in one direction, and we can expect to see a doubling of electricity demand in the UK over that period. So our challenge collectively is how we bring the knowledge, capability and skills in this room and in the wider community together to be able to make the right decisions at the right time. Whether we like it or not, infrastructure does take time. I'm sure many of you would say it should take less time, and it's our job to ensure that's the case. But what we all want is for that infrastructure to be planned on the most efficient basis. Dig once, if you like, as a brand, such that the interventions we do make in our network are as efficient as they can possibly be. And that's important for 2 reasons. It's important because that will reduce the level of disruption that we as businesses and private citizens experience as the infrastructure is installed in the highways and byways that we all use. And then, of course, we're all bill payers. And so it's important that those investments are as efficient as they can possibly be, so we limit and manage the impact for businesses and private citizens on what we pay for electricity. So I guess my challenge is how we get that policy certainty, how we bring together the right level of transparency from our different organisations and the stakeholders we work with across the country in such a way that we can plan this journey in the most efficient way possible and achieve what we all want, which is a decarbonised transport sector without endless roadworks and disruption that would otherwise be required.
Well, thank you very much. And if I may say so, certainty is the crucial thing. The reason that I spent a great deal of time in the House of Lords in the last 3 or 4 years being a nuisance to the Conservative whips was the constant inability of the government to give the certainty which was crucial. And that ridiculous change from 2030 to 2035, which actually did no good to anybody, certainly didn't achieve what was said it would achieve, merely confused people and meant that people whose plans had been on the first date were put into disarray and undermined people's confidence in the government's commitments. So I'm hoping that we're going to hear a very direct statement from the present government that it will stick to the 2030, which is what it said in opposition, and what I think the minister almost said but didn't quite say when I was listening in great detail to what he actually said as he read that sentence out. It sounded to me we weren't quite there, but we were nearly there. So, and having been around as a minister for some time, I know when the sentence has been written for that purpose. So he's not made an announcement, but he's got quite close to it. So I think we must look very carefully there. Well, now we've got something under half an hour for questions of the panel. So can I have the first question? We have got microphones around. So can I have, there's a gentleman right in the middle, about as the most inconvenient place for the for the microphone to get. Now you'll have a fight between you as to which one hands it along. Who is going to give me the second question so that I know? There's a lady here in the front, which is easier to get to. Well done. Now, can I have your question there? And then there's a gentleman behind there. So, the gentleman who's got the, I hope, got the microphone now. Yes, please.
Hello, my name's Ronan Rudra from Z-Bus Technologies, and we are repowering diesel buses to electric. So I'm touching on something that Professor Neville Jackson talked about, of automotive industry in the UK and incentives. So why we would ideally like there not to be incentives down the line in this transition period is really useful. And there is incentives for brand new buses, but not for repowering. And we're obviously competing with foreign people, Chinese people who are bringing buses in. And it becomes harder to compete with a brand new bus, which is already a challenge, if they are getting a large grant, the customers, and we are not. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are about whether we should still have a grant system, whether something can be done for the repowering market, and how we encourage that to happen.
Yeah, what about repowering?
I'm not a politician. I'm just a simple engineer. But what I would say is, rather than take that as a detail, I would say what we're really looking for is for the UK to be competitive, so you can have a level playing field. If our international competitors are offering something, we need to be able to compete with that. That's the key. If there is a natural growth for that kind of business, repowering, we want to be in it. And we don't want to be disadvantaged compared with somewhere else. That's really the key. Whether repowering is going to have a major impact on emissions, whether it's a really good transition, I really couldn't say. I've not got enough detail to answer that. I would say I've looked at a number of repowering options. In fact, I chaired a European committee looking at a big prize on repowering at one stage. And we could never make the economics work. It is really challenging, as you probably know yourself. I think if you've got a certain amount of money to spend, you need to work out where it's going to have the most impact. If it's in repowering, fine, but I don't have enough data to be able to provide an answer.
Well, we ought to, it's data worth having. I'm sure that's important. The only thing I would say is I do think that the new world we live in has really got to come to terms with the fact that we ought to be using the resources that we have and reusing them. And I am very worried about the whole issue of repair and renewal. I've just found that it was cheaper to buy a new washing machine than to buy the mealy spare parts. Quite wrong, and that is just wrong. And I think we do have to take that aspect of it seriously into account.
So
there's a lady in the front.
Just to finish that, the UK Auto Council strategy does have remanufacturing as a key part.
Yeah, very good.
Because it's really important for the future, particularly when you're looking at net zero.
Yes, good.
Hi there, Lorna McAteer. I'm a head of fleet, so you'll be pleased to know I'm not going to open the debate on vans and commercial vehicles and the 2020-35 target. I'll leave that for something else. What I would like to know, though, is the government says there is no money and there's a huge black hole. So, from each of you, what is the one policy or regulation change you would want that would help you accelerate the transition for you and for everybody else?
What a good question, but one sentence from each. So I'll start with the AA.
Well, I think when it comes to levelling up and the haves and the have-nots, you know, it's great if you've got salary sacrifice and you've got off-street parking. It is a no-brainer to get an EV. You know, without a doubt, you can save a fortune. If you live in a council flat and you don't have salary sacrifice, that is difficult. You've got to charge your vehicle on the street, etc., and it's much more expensive. So one policy could be to cut VAT for on-street charging to 5%, like you get at home.
Good show. I think it's probably, so it's cut VAT on-street charging to 5%, which I think we may win in the courts, because I think it may be that they've been overcharging the VAT for all these years, but we'll see to that. Please.
I think somebody mentioned it earlier, but the consent arrangement in the UK for the installation of new assets, both for distribution and transmission, often feels not conducive to moving at the pace we need to install the infrastructure we need, where we need it, in the time frame we need it. So a number of reviews have highlighted this as an issue, and I think that's an area where we could make a real difference. It would accelerate pace.
Excellent.
It's going to be quite similar answer to Mark, because we're readying for a doubling of electricity. And therefore we can be as clever as we want in optimising the current grids we have, but we have to deliver net new grids. So to take a very specific example in distribution, if we modified permitted development rights, I could upgrade the network seamlessly quicker than I can today for one change.
One change. Good. Please.
So I'm going to assume for this that the ZEV mandate is there and we're not moving on that. That's a must. I'm also going to assume that the benefit in kind rates are going to be extended, and we're going to find out about that hopefully soon. But if any of that's under question, then we can debate that. So therefore, back to Edmund's point, off-street charging, on-street charging. There's loads of people that have driveways, right? We're very small numbers actually of EVs as the UK car park at the minute. Even if we just go after those that do have driveways to roll out this technology quickly, bring down the costs, that is a great way to go. But actually on things like salary sacrifice, that is limited to people with employers that are setting it up. So if you have an HR director or a business that decides that they don't want to set that up, it feels like a bit of effort, that's a bit of a challenge. What if we were to take that beyond the employer? What if you could do like a gift aid type scheme or a charitable giving type scheme for salary sacrifice so that actually everyone could access that? And then you could just not worry about whether the HR teams are thinking it's a bit of an effort.
What a good idea. Finally, the RAC.
So I would say, from RAC perspective, our view is maybe 70, 80% of consumers are going to be able to go electric quite easily. There's probably 15, 20, 25% who are going to struggle. What are we going to do for them? So my view would be, let's be open to all of the options we can possibly find, because otherwise we're never going to meet our targets, particularly when it comes to not just passenger cars, but vans, commercial vehicles, and off-road mobile machinery. So let's be open, let's push ahead faster. If somebody offers you a good technology and a good idea, let's support it, because otherwise we'll not get there.
Well, I just want to say, the older you get, the more you understand that it's almost never either or. It's almost always both and I think that's the issue here. So thank you very much. Very good panel. I thought there were some very good examples here. And the gentleman there is now going to ask the next question. You are the next one on the list. You put your hand up. Yes, you. Yes. Just answered the question. Well, that's very good. Who have I got next then? Well, there's a gentleman behind you, just there. Not the one scratching his head, but the one at the along there.
Thank you, Jamie Wilson from Alexander Dennis. We're a bus manufacturer in the UK. Neville mentioned earlier the challenge of China subsidising domestic product, which results in a sort of lack of level playing field. We're certainly feeling that in the UK. With UK domestic grid energy and carbon intensity is approximately about a third of that of China. We don't seem to recognise the embedded carbon footprint of manufacturing in China and then shipping boxes of fresh air around about the world. I guess the question is, what can be done to level up the UK market competitiveness relative to this challenge with China and stop encouraging offshoring or dirty secrets with no recognition of the carbon cost of doing so?
China. Napoleon III said, China is asleep. The world will shake when it awakes. And I think that's the position that we're in. So I'm going to come first, please, to you, Fiona.
I mean, I think that the Chinese have invested significant amounts in the technology and their manufacturing capability is huge. And so I hear your question. I don't think I've got a straightforward answer for you, unfortunately. I think they are bringing affordable vehicles to help us decarbonise, and their cars are still better than the ICE equivalents. Would I love to see UK manufacturing come through? By the way, I was super excited to hear your speech. I don't know if anyone else, that's the first time I've heard that articulated, and I just thought that was really fantastic. And, I'm really, really excited to see that taken forward. So actually, I'm excited for your answer.
Well, I was really giving Neville a chance to think, because he's obviously the one who's nearest to the answer, so I'm going to come to him now.
It's a really good point. Cost of energy in the UK, we've always suggested, has to be competitive internationally. However, we also have to recognise that we've reduced the carbon intensity of our grid much faster than many of our competitors, and it has cost us. We need to find a way to make that a competitive advantage. And as we move to net zero, it will be, very definitely. In the short term, we need to make sure that the large users of energy are treated maybe slightly differently. I'll give a good example. The new battery manufacturing facility in Sunderland, that's going to make about 15 gigawatt hours of batteries, has a supply of 200 megawatts. that's about the same size as the electricity supply to the whole of Coventry. So manufacturing is going to change significantly to be much more energy intensive, particularly for electric vehicles. And we need to find a way to deal with that. I would say our colleagues in China are getting away with this because they're using a lot of coal. It's a lot cheaper. They don't have such strict environmental regulations. We've all heard about the 7-mile wide toxic lakes they have from some of their rare earth production techniques. We need to exploit our ability to do things in an environmentally friendly way and to make much more use of our low carbon certification, which I'm sure will be there when it comes to carbon trading, particularly when we're exporting from Europe. I'm not sure that I'm the right person to ask about the political side of this. My colleagues at SMMT are much more closer to this in terms of policy. But my forward view is we need to continue decarbonising the grid because it will be a competitive advantage. And let's try and deal with the issues that raises at the moment by thinking a little bit more constructively about large users, particularly when it comes to manufacturing.
It does seem to me that we ought to recognise that the Chinese are weaponising climate change. They believe in climate change. They're doing more, actually, proportionally than almost any other country. And although they've still got the coal-fired power, if you look at the speed, it's just about to tip, and they will actually meet their net zero 2060 figures. In my view, they'll meet it 10 years earlier because they always underestimate. That's how they do it. But in the meantime, what they're saying is, we believe in climate change, the rest of the world is coming to understand climate change, and we're going to make money out of it. It's a wonderfully capitalist concept, and it really does depress me that we have been less good at seeing how you weaponize this whole issue, which is why if you buy a photovoltaic cell, it's most likely to be made in China, because that is how they have seen this as a market opportunity. And I do believe that you're quite right that we should be aiming off and working the taxation system to cover the appalling ways in which they produce these things. Not some of it's much worse than you refer to. It's about slave labour and the Uyghurs and such like. But the fact is, we have to recognise it, and we've not been prepared even to face up to it, which is what we ought to be doing.
Just making a small comment about the Climate Change Committee and its assumption that external emissions really didn't count. We have to move away from that. Well, we have to look very carefully at what other countries are doing and whether their products that they supply to us are very high carbon. And we need to work out a way of making sure that we have equality in how that market works.
But the Climate Change Committee specifically says that. It's the opposite. The only reason that the Climate Change Committee uses internal production figures is because that is the international comparative. But every 2 years we produce the figures of consumption to show whether they have fallen or not, and we constantly have made that point. So I don't wish to disagree with you on the issue, but I do have to say the Climate Change Committee has specifically said that there is. But the reason you have to use internal production figures is that's the only way you can compare it equally with other countries, and also it stops you having double counting. And the biggest thing of all is it's the one set of emissions that you have total control over. Whereas if you buy something from someone else, you neither have control over the emissions made, nor do you really have control about what they say those emissions are. And one of the problems with the Chinese is that getting the figures for the real emissions is pretty difficult.
That was my point.
Good. I just want to say we're on the same side. I don't like division on the panel. Right. Who comes next? There's a lady here. What a good thing. Just here.
Thank you. Victoria Saunders, Innovate UK. My question is, we've heard a lot about BEVs, and as Professor Neville alluded to, there are other technologies in the mix to get us to net zero. So I'm curious to hear about what people in the panel are doing to prepare for hydrogen.
Right. Here is the elephant in the room. Hydrogen. Who shall I start with? I don't think I've started with you. Here we are.
That's an interesting question to ask somebody that works for an electricity distribution network. Look, I think broadly we're agnostic. What I can observe in the marketplace over the last 18 months is, I think, had you asked that question 18 months ago around the HGV market, I would have told you that we're assuming that the HGV market would head towards a hydrogen pathway. That seems to be changing, right? The mood music and what we're seeing from our customers is, and it seems to be being driven from within Europe, is a move towards electric HGVs. And so we've got a number of large connections that we're in the process of delivering, particularly of Kent, as the lorries come off the ferries and out the tunnel, is large supplies necessary to provide electric charging to eHGVs. The direction of travel seems to be away from hydrogen. But I think, but as I say, it's our job to make sure that whatever pathway we choose as a country, that the electricity network is fit for purpose and can fill the gap as and when and if it emerges.
Hydrogen, I think I'll turn to Octopus.
I mean, so for those that don't know me, I actually used to work in hydrogen cars 20 years ago for BMW, so developing hydrogen fuel cells in Germany. And actually, there's just loads of technical challenges with hydrogen cars. They're really, actually, it's very inefficient, change the electricity to then turn it into hydrogen, to then transport it, store it, all this kind of stuff. And it's very, very unlikely, I think, that we are going to reinvest in hydrogen for passenger cars. I think I thought there might be applications for larger trucks and things like that, and therefore we might get some infrastructure. Then there might be some pockets of people that might start to invest in the cars, and then cars might come down in price. Actually, I don't even see that happening particularly right now. It looks like larger trucks and things are still moving electric rather than they are going into hydrogen too. So there might be things in other bigger applications in transport as well, but I don't see it happening for passenger cars particularly, and I don't see the route through to that being efficient, or is my perspective.
Anybody else want to talk about hydrogen?
I mean, we've at the EAA, we've got a fleet of 3,000 vehicles that we use on the roads, and our heavier trucks, so the recovery trucks, are about 7% of the fleet, but responsible for about 36% of the emissions, and that's where the problem is. So we've looked at a number of solutions, and we're agnostic to the technology. It's about testing and learning. So we do have an electric HGV thing that works very well. Cost an absolute fortune. You know, the guys love driving it. It's quiet and everything. We have a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle that we're testing around Birmingham. Try and find somewhere to refuel it. It's very difficult. When we took it to London, it had to go on the back of a truck because we couldn't fuel it on the way, so there are problems there. But we're open to these solutions. So for some of our diesel vehicles, as an interim, we're looking at HVO, hydro-treated vegetable oil. And it's probably not a long-term solution, but it's reduced emissions for those diesel vehicles by over 80%. So it's not anti-hydrogen. And if someone came to us with a vehicle, with a depot, so I think for some of the buses, I think we're going to hear this afternoon from Wales about what they're doing with hydrogen buses and things like that. And I think where you've got a depot and all of that, it's probably more feasible. I think for our business, we'd struggle.
Well, I was very impressed to see what JCB had done, looking at hydrogen for very heavy road-making vehicles which have to run for 24 hours. Indeed, I've filled one up, so I went and looked at it in that way. But it is a very niche business. What seems to me to have been the problem was that there was a moment in which hydrogen was the way in which politicians got out of doing the things that they ought to do, because they would talk about, oh, we'll wait for the hydrogen economy, they'd say. And I'm not a scientist, but I always remind people that you need that amount of hydrogen to get that amount of energy. and that there's a fundamental physics problem about hydrogen as a mechanism. And there's also a real problem about fuel cells in dusty atmospheres, which is why Bamford has been so brilliant in actually saying to his scientists, I want something that works the same sort of way as a diesel train, so that I can put the hydrogen in and make it work. But of course, it's also very hard to produce hydrogen at a reasonable price which is green. There's no doubt about the energy input that you really have to have. But Neville, must come back to you.
Yeah, I've been quite fortunate to work on all of these technologies for many years, fuel cells, battery electric, hybrids, working with a whole range of different fuels, both light duty, heavy duty. I think we're all pretty convinced that the majority of passenger cars need to be battery electric. That makes a lot of sense for all those that are able to do it. For heavy duty, it's a lot more difficult. To build an electric 44-ton truck that has high utilization, making that go battery electric is very difficult. Some trucks will go battery electric because of the duty cycle, we're pretty sure. But we need to look at what the alternatives are to that. And one of the least worst is probably hydrogen, in terms of how can we provide a different fuel. Trying to provide that to 8,000 filling stations in the UK is very unlikely, but we have 147 truck stops. Actually getting a new fuel to 147 truck stops is a lot easier. And we need to think very carefully again about hydrogen from a systems perspective. I think when we talk about efficiency with hydrogen, it's being a bit linear, bit old thinking. We have to think about the whole system. For instance, we need about 4 times the amount of renewables than we have today. There are going to be many occasions when we have far too much electricity. What are we going to do with it? Good argument is the easiest way maybe to store that energy is to turn it into hydrogen. Maybe reuse it to produce energy later. Maybe, again, it's a good fuel to use for some of those difficult to electrify trucks. And it makes a lot of sense. What I would say is from an Auto Council perspective, we've thrown our weight behind the Hydrogen Innovation Initiative, which is looking at the whole value chain, from producing the hydrogen to transporting it to using it in a whole range of sectors, because we need this system thinking to make it work. But don't rule out hydrogen for those heavy-duty trucks. And particularly, remember, hydrogen is a game changer for the internal combustion engine in terms of almost eliminating air quality issues. And we should seriously look at that like all of our international competitors are.
Well, I think that's a very good point to finish on, not just because it's the right moment, but also because it illustrates, first of all, the fundamental truth that it's usually both and rather than either or, that we have to be sensible about how best to use the technology before us. And that means, first of all, that we should never give up on anything, but keep everything in the on the agenda. It also means that we ought to recognise very clearly that we will need to think about the whole system. Indeed, the thing that's come really out of our whole discussion has been the importance of thinking system-wide. I mean, even if you're talking about renovating, repowering buses, you're actually trying to think about the whole system of bus production and where it plays. You have to think about these things system-wide. And human beings aren't terribly good at that. It's a thing you actually have to try to force yourself to do. And we know that right across the board. The earlier questions, for example, about how we should think about silos in government remind us that system-wide in government is pretty difficult, and system-wide in our own business is pretty difficult. And therefore, perhaps if we could take away a message from this panel, it is we should look at all these things, keep them all there, We have got a very short period of time to win this battle, and we shouldn't exclude any of those things. On the other hand, we also ought to make sure that we don't go down the Betamax route. It's quite a difficult balance to have.